Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Jummah Mubarak, happy Friday, and welcome to today's Friday Reflections on this, the 11th of June, 2021. I hope everybody is well, wherever you're watching this from. And yeah, I hope everybody's looking forward to the weekend as well. Weather's looking a lot better here in the UK. Obviously, it's going to vary where you are around the world, but it's looking quite good here at the moment, alhamdulillah. Now, not always, but often on Friday Reflections, I tend to read a book by an Islamic scholar, or at least, a chapter or reading or something from that book, and go through it. Offering some of my own commentary and stuff to make it easier to understand. But today, I'm going to read from a different book, which is quite different from what I would normally read, but also astonishingly similar, though you might not expect it. Now, you must be thinking, what on earth is he on about? And you'd be absolutely right. On occasion, I have read Friday Reflections from, Plato or something like this, that is from the classics or from another work of literature that I feel is worth reading because there's something that we can benefit from reading it. But today, I'm actually going to be reading a book by a 33rd degree Freemason. And this is going to be probably a bit shocking for some people who are watching this, who may have heard things about Freemasonry and have their own idea of what Freemasonry is, even though they may not know any Masons themselves or have any other relationship with Freemasonry. But one of the things I have been doing for many, many years, long before I was involved with the Association of British Muslims or as a chaplain at the University of Birmingham, is interfaith work. And I've been involved in interfaith work almost as long as I've been a Muslim. As you can probably imagine, as someone who has come from a cultural background where Islam is less commonly practiced, and embracing Islam myself, there was a process by which I arrived at Islam. And that process was a process that involved research and reading about all manner of different things, not only Islam, but all different religions, beliefs, spiritual books, many different things. And this process continued even after I embraced Islam because it became a deep interest of mine. Now, I forget exactly when I came across this man, but some years ago, I heard about a book called The Secret Teachings of All Ages. This is the main work by Manly P. Hall. Manly P. Hall was a man who lived initially in Canada, and then he moved to California between 1901 and 1990. And he was someone who was deeply interested in philosophies, religion, spirituality, and all manner of things along those lines. And he himself studied and researched deeply these subjects. And this is very evident because when we read his book, we could see how much he understood about different religions and spiritual teachings, aside from his own that he practiced himself. He was also a pastor of a church, which is interesting because, how all of these things can actually come together and a person can wear many different hats. And this wasn't the only book that he published, by the way. He did publish a number of other books, but this one has become his most well-known book. Literally, before he published The Secret Teachings of All Ages, he was just another preacher within his city. But after he published it, he became someone who was recognized within his own country and around the world as someone who was deeply knowledgeable on religion, spirituality, philosophies, ancient teachings, all manner of things, as it was revealed through his writings. He became a Freemason in 1954. So this was before, wait a minute. Yeah, became a Freemason in 1954. And in 1973, he was appointed as or recognized as a 33rd degree Mason, which is the highest honor conferred in the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite. He also founded his own organization, the Philosophical Research Society, which I believe is still going to this day. Yeah, it's still going to this day, continuing passing on his work. Now, you might be wondering, why is it that I want to read this book from a Freemason? But there's a very good reason. And part of it is to do with the misconceptions, conspiracy theories, and all sorts of things which we find spreading through our communities. These days, people don't get their information from books. They get their information from YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, which doesn't really have much information on it, but there's not much you can cram in a minute video. But people are getting their information from these sources. And the people who are producing these videos they could be anybody. Sometimes they're doctors, sometimes they are people who are very knowledgeable, but many of them are not knowledgeable. And no matter how they present themselves, you've got to be careful. Now, there is a chapter in this book on page 619 of, certainly with this edition of the book that I have, between 619 and 632. And this chapter in this book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, by this 33rd degree Freemason, is called The Faith of Islam. Now, I hope that's piqued your interest and you can see why I want to read this book. I mean, I've actually read a lot from this book over the years, but why I want to read this particular part to yourselves. The thing is, there are people within our communities who think Freemasonry is an enemy of Muslims and an enemy of Islam. Now, I mean, Freemasonry is huge. It's a huge fraternity that actually there's a number of fraternities these days because it fragmented into different fraternities. So it's not simply one fraternity. So we can't just like say all Freemasons for a start think a certain way or are a certain way. Just like you can't say all Muslims think a certain way or are a certain way, or all Christians or all Jews, because you've got different kinds of people within these faiths and also within fraternities like Freemasonry. Freemasonry isn't a religion. It's a fraternity, a brotherhood of people who they share some common values. And I'm not going to go into everything about Freemasonry today. I'm not a Freemason myself, by the way, but I do know Freemasons, and I have spent time talking to them and learning from them over the years to see what they're about. And quite contrary to what you might think, because it's often referred to as a secret society, and there was a time in the past when Freemasons did need to be secret because they were actually heavily persecuted by the church, because a lot of Freemasons had different ideas and were more open-minded than what the church wanted at that particular time. So they were actually persecuted. So this is why they had to be secret. I mean, just like if you were a Jewish person or a Christian or a Muslim person or some other faith living within some Christian countries going back to something like 500 years ago, you'd have to watch your back, and you might not necessarily want to be too open about your beliefs because it could get you into a lot of trouble. There were not all Christians, but there was some countries in the past that were quite intolerant. But today, I mean, Freemasons don't need to be as secretive. So, I mean, if you befriend some and get to know them, they will often discuss with you, if you're interested, you know, what they actually believe, what they're about, what they like to do. And some of them can be actually very open and friendly. So, you know, it's a good idea, right? We shouldn't judge people offhand. We should get to know them and what they're about. But anyway, I'm going to read this chapter from this book now, because a lot of you probably don't have access to this book. You probably never even heard of this book before. But this is what a 33rd degree Freemason has written about Islam. So it's not my words, this is still what the 33rd degree Freemason wrote. The faith of Islam. Representative of the attitude of Christendom towards Islam, till recent years at least, is Alexander Ross's postscript to the anglicized version, published in 1649, of Sire de Rieux's French translation of the Quran. The author of the postscript directs the following invective against Muhammad and the Quran. Good reader, this is not my words. Good reader, the great Arabian impostor, now at last after 1,000 years, is by the way of France arrived in England, and his Al-Quran, or Galimufri of errors, astaghfirullah, a brat as deformed as his parent and full of heresies as his scald head was of scurvy, hath learned to speak English. If you will take a brief view of Al-Quran, you will find it a hodgepodge made up of 4 ingredients, of contradictions, of blasphemy, of ridiculous fables, of lies, of stuff. But this is what he's quoting. This is not what Manly P. Hall is saying. He's quoting this because this is where a lot of people in the West got their view of Islam from Alexander Ross's postscript to the anglicized version of a French translation of the Quran in 1649. Manly P. Hall, on the other hand, says this: the accusation of blasphemy is emphasized against Muhammad because he affirmed that God, being unmarried, was incapable of having a son. The fallacy of this argument, however, is apparent from the Prophet's own views of the nature of God, as contained in the 2nd surah of the Quran. To Allah, God, belongeth the east and the west. Therefore, whithersoever ye turn yourselves to pray, there is the face of Allah. For Allah is omnipresent and omniscient. They say Allah hath begotten children. Allah forbid. To him belongeth whatever is in heaven and on earth. All is possessed by him, the creator of heaven and earth. And when he decrees a thing, he only saith to it, be, and it is. In other words, the God of Islam has but to desire, and the object of that desire at once comes into being. Whereas the God of Alexander Ross must proceed in accord with the laws of human generation. So actually, we've got this 33-degree Freemason here defending the Prophet Muhammad against this Alexander Ross, and basically saying that his concept of God is extremely shallow. And he thinks that God has to follow like human processes and things, which Manly P. Hall himself regards as absolutely preposterous. Then Manly P. Hall continues and says, Muhammad, Prophet of Islam, the desired of all nations, was born in Mecca, AD 570 and died in Medina AD 632, or in the 11th year after the Hijrah. Washington Irving thus describes the signs and wonders accompanying the birth of the prophet. So that was that. His mother suffered none of the pangs of travail. So no, what do you call it? Labor pains. At the moment of his coming into the world, a celestial light illumined the surrounding country, and the newborn child, raising his eyes to heaven, exclaimed, "God is great. There is no God but God, and I am his prophet. Heaven and earth, we are assured, were agitated at this event. The lake Salwa shrank back to its secret springs, leaving its borders dry, while the Tigris, bursting its bounds, overflowing the neighboring lands. The palace of Khosru, the king of Persia, shook on its foundations, and several of its towers were toppled to the earth. In the same eventful night, the sacred fire of Zoroaster, which was guarded by the Magi, had burned without interruption for upward of 1,000 years, but was suddenly extinguished, and all the idols in the world fell down. See Muhammad and his successors. While the prophet was still but a toddling babe, the angel Gabriel, with 70 wings, came to him, and cutting open the child, withdrew the heart. This Gabriel cleansed of the black drop of original sin, which is in every human heart, because of the perfidy of Adam, and then returned the organ to its proper place in the prophet's body. See footnote in E.H. Palmer's translation of the Quran. In his youth, Muhammad traveled with the Meccan caravans. On one occasion, acted as armor bearer for his uncle, and spent a considerable time among the Bedouins, from whom he learned many of the religious and philosophic traditions of ancient Arabia. While traveling with his uncle, Abu Talib, Muhammad contacted Nestorian Christians, having encamped on a certain night near one of their monasteries. Here the young prophet-to-be secured much of his information concerning the origin and the doctrines of the Christian faith. With the passing years, Muhammad attained marked success in business, and when about 26 years old, married one of his employees, a wealthy widow, nearly 15 years his senior. The widow, Khadija by name, was apparently somewhat mercenary, for finding her young business manager most efficient, she resolved to retain him in that capacity for life. Khadija was a woman of exceptional mentality, and to her integrity and devotion must be ascribed the early success of the Islamic cause. By his marriage, Muhammad was elevated from a position of comparative poverty to one of great wealth and power, and so exemplary was his conduct that he became known throughout Mecca as the faithful and true. Muhammad would have lived and died an honored and respected Meccan had he not unhesitantly sacrificed both his wealth and social position in the service of the God whose voice he heard while meditating in the cavern on Mount Hira in the month of Ramadan. Year after year, Muhammad climbed the rocky and desolate slopes of Mount Hira, since called Jebel Nur, the mountain of light, and here in his loneliness cried out to God to reveal anew the pure religion of Adam, that spiritual doctrine lost to mankind through the dissensions of religious factions. Khadija, solicitous over her husband's ascetic practices, which were impairing his physical health, sometimes accompanied him in his weary vigil, and with a womanly intuition sensed the travail of his soul, so the efforts or work of his soul. At last, One night in his 40th year, he lay upon the floor of the cavern, enveloped in his cloak. A great light burst upon him. Overcome with a sense of perfect peace and understanding in the blessedness of the celestial presence, he lost consciousness. When he came to himself again, the angel Gabriel stood above him, exhibiting a silken shawl with mysterious characters traced upon it. From these characters, Muhammad gained the basic doctrines later embodied in the Quran. Then Gabriel spoke in a clear and wonderful voice, declaring Muhammad to be the prophet of the living God. In awe and trembling, Muhammad hastened to Khadijah, fearing the vision to have been inspired by the same evil spirits who served the pagan magicians so greatly despised by him. Khadijah assured him that his own virtuous life would be his protection and that he need fear no evil. Thus reassured, the Prophet awaited further visitations from Gabriel. When these did not come, however, such a despair filled his soul that he attempted self-destruction, only to be stopped in the very act of casting himself over a cliff by a sudden appearance of Gabriel, who again assured the prophets that the revelations needed by his people would be given to him as necessarily arose. Possibly as a result of his lonely periods of meditation, Muhammad seemingly was subject to ecstatic swoons. On the occasions when the various surahs of the Quran were dictated, he is said to have fallen unconscious, and regardless of the chill of the surrounding air, to have been covered with beads of perspiration. Often these attacks came without warning. At other times, he would sit wrapped in a blanket to prevent a chill from the copious perspiration, and while apparently unconscious, would dictate the various passages which a small circle of trusted friends would either commit to memory or reduce to writing. On one occasion in later life, when Abu Bakr referred to the grey hairs in his beard, Muhammad lifted the end of his beard and looking at it, declared its whiteness to be due to the physical agony attendant upon his periods of inspiration. If the writings attributed to Muhammad be considered as merely the hallucinations of an epileptic, and for that reason discounted, his Christian detractors should beware lest, with the doctrines of the Prophet, they also undermine the very teachings which they themselves affirm. For many of the disciples, apostles, and saints of the early church are known to have been subject to nervous disorders. Muhammad's first convert was his own wife, Khadijah, who was followed by other members of his immediate family, a circumstance which moved Sir William Muir to note. It is strongly corroborative of Muhammad's sincerity that the earliest converts to Islam were not only of upright character, but his own bosom friends and people of his household, who, intimately acquainted with his private life, could not fail otherwise to have detected these discrepancies, which ever more or less exist between the professions of the hypocritical deceiver abroad and his actions at home. See the life of Muhammad. Among the first to accept the faith of Islam was Abu Bakr, who became Muhammad's closest and most faithful friend, in fact, his alter ego. Abu Bakr, a man of brilliant attainments, contributed materially to the success of the Prophet's enterprise, and in accordance with the express wish of the Prophet, became the leader of the faithful after Muhammad's death. Aisha, the daughter of Abu Bakr, later became the right wife of Muhammad, thus further cementing the bond of fraternity between the two men. Quietly but industriously, Muhammad promulgated his doctrines among a small circle of powerful friends. When the enthusiasm of his followers finally forced his hand and he publicly announced his mission, he was already the leader of a strong and well-organized faction. Fearing Muhammad's growing prestige, the people of Mecca waived the time-honored tradition that blood could not be spilt within the holy city. decided to exterminate Islam by assassinating the Prophet. All the different groups combined in this undertaking so that the guilt. Wa alaikum assalam. How are you? I'm reading from this book by Manly P. Hall. This is what a 33rd degree Mason has written about Islam back in the last century. Fearing Muhammad's growing prestige, the people of Mecca, waiving the time-honored tradition that blood could not be spilt within the holy city, decided to exterminate Islam by assassinating the Prophet. All the different groups combined in this undertaking so that the guilt for the crime might therefore be evenly distributed. Discovering the danger in time, Muhammad left his friend Ali in his bed and fled with Abu Bakr from the city. And after adroitly eluding the Meccans, joined the main body of his followers that had preceded him to Yathrib, afterwards called Medina. Upon this instant, called the Hijrah or flight, is based the Islamic chronological system, i.e. the calendar. Yes, alhamdulillah, I'm good. How are you? Dating from the Hijrah, the power of the Prophet steadily grew. In the 8th year, Muhammad entered Mecca after practically a bloodless victory and established it as the spiritual center of his faith. Planting his standard to the north of Mecca, he rode into the city after encircling several times the sacred Kaaba, ordered 360 images within his precincts to be hewn down. He then entered the Kaaba himself, cleansed it of its idolatrous associations, and rededicated the structure to Allah, the monotheistic God of Islam. The text I'm reading from is called The Secret Teachings of All Ages, and it's by a man called Manly P. Hall, who was a 33rd degree Mason and a scholar of different religious and philosophical traditions. I'm reading this because there's a lot of misconceptions in the world, and maybe this will help build some understanding that there are people within different traditions who are open-minded and are interested in what facts and reality are. And this is particularly interesting because Manly P. Hall was born in 1919 and died in 1990. When he wrote this, there was much less awareness within Canada, his native country, and the United States of America about Islam. And it must have caused some consternation that he wrote things like this. He must have been challenged on it because he's actually defending the Prophet Muhammad, even though he himself was a Christian pastor, as well as a Freemason. Muhammad next granted amnesty to all his enemies for their attempts to destroy him. Under his protection, Mecca increased in power and glory, becoming the focal point of a great annual pilgrimage, which even to this day winds across the desert in the north in the months of pilgrimage and numbers over 300,000 in his train. So you can see how long ago he wrote this, because now there are millions that go on Hajj. Well, not at this particular moment because of COVID, but normally. In the 10th year after the Hijrah, Muhammad led the valedictory pilgrimage and for the last time rode at the head of the faithful along the sacred way leading to Mecca and the Black Stone. As the premonition of death was strong upon him, he desired this pilgrimage to be the perfect model for all the thousands that would follow. Conscious that life was waning away within him, writes Washington Irving, Muhammad, during this last sojourn in the sacred city of his faith, sought to engrave his teachings deeply in the minds and hearts of his followers. For this purpose, he preached frequently in the Kaaba from the pulpit, or at the open air from the back of his camel. Listen to my words, he would say, for I know not whether, after this year, we shall ever meet here again. O my hearers, I am but a man like yourselves. The angel of death may at any time appear, and I must obey his summons. While thus preaching, The very heavens are said to have opened, and the voice of God spoke, saying, "This day I have perfected your religion and accomplished in you my grace." When these words were uttered, the multitude fell down in adoration, and even Muhammad's camel knelt. See Muhammad and his successors. Having completed the valedictory pilgrimage, Muhammad returned to Medina. In the 7th year after the Hijrah, an attempt was made at Kaaba to poison the Prophet. As Muhammad took the first mouthful of the poisoned food, the evil design was revealed to him either by the taste of the meat or, as the faithful believed, by divine intercession. He had already swallowed a small portion of the food, however, and for the remainder of his life he suffered almost constantly from the effects of the poison. In AH 11, when his final illness came upon him, Muhammad insisted that the subtle effects of the poison were the indirect cause of his approaching end. It is related that during his last sickness, he rose one night and visited a burial ground on the outskirts of Medina, evidently believing that he too would soon be numbered with the dead. At this time, he told an attendant that the choice had been offered him of continuing his physical life or going to his Lord, and that he had chosen to meet his Maker. Muhammad suffered greatly with his head and side and also from fever, but on June 8th seemed convalescent. He joined his followers in prayer and seated himself in the courtyard, delivering a lecture to the faithful in a clear and powerful voice. Apparently, he overtaxed his strength, for it was necessary to assist him to the house of Aisha, which opened into the court of the mosque. Here, upon a rough pallet laid on the bare floor, the Prophet of Islam spent his last 2 hours on earth. When she saw that her aged husband was suffering intense pain, Aisha, then but a girl of 20, lifted the grey head of the man she had known from infancy, and who must have seemed more like a father than a husband, supported him in her arms till the end. I think there's something wrong with the date there, but he's not a Muslim. He's doing quite well. Feeling that death was upon him, Muhammad prayed, "O Lord, I beseech thee, assist me in the agonies of death." Then almost in a whisper, he repeated 3 times, "Gabriel, come close unto me." For details, consult The Life of Muhammad by Sir William Muir. In The Hero as a Prophet, Thomas Carlyle writes thus of the death of Muhammad. His last words were a prayer. Broken ejaculations of a heart struggled up in trembled hope towards its maker. Muhammad was buried under the floor of the apartment which he died. The present condition of the grave is thus described. Above the hujra is a green dome, surmounted by a large gilt crescent, springing from a series of globes. Within the building are the tombs of Muhammad, Abu Bakr, and Umar, with a space reserved for the grave of our Lord Jesus Christ, who Muslims say will again visit the earth and die and be buried at Al-Madinah. The grave of Fatima, the Prophet's daughter, is supposed to be in a separate part of the building, although some say she was buried in Baqi. The Prophet's body is said to be stretched full length on the right side and the right palm supporting the right cheek, the face facing Mecca. Close behind him is placed Abu Bakr, whose face fronts Muhammad's shoulder, and then Umar, who occupies the same position with respect to his predecessor. Amongst Christian historians, there is a popular story to the effect that Mohammedans believed the coffin of their prophet to be suspended in the air, which has no foundation whatsoever in Muslim literature. And Nibur thinks the story must have arisen from rude pictures sold to strangers. See a Dictionary of Islam. Concerning the character of Muhammad, there have been the grossest misconceptions. No evidence exists to support the charges of extreme cruelty and licentiousness laid at his door. On the other hand, the more closely the life of Muhammad is scrutinized, by dispassionate investigators, the more apparent become the finer qualities of his nature. Now, this is a 33rd degree Freemason who wrote this. Concerning the character of Muhammad, there have been the grossest misconceptions. No evidence exists to support the charges of extreme cruelty and licentiousness laid at his door. On the other hand, the more closely the life of Muhammad is scrutinized by dispassionate investigators, the more apparent become the finer qualities of his nature. So here he is defending the Prophet Muhammad, even though he's a Christian and a Freemason. Muhammad himself, so it said, in the words of Carlyle, Muhammad himself, after all that can be said about him, was not a sensual man. We err widely if we consider this man as a common voluptuary, intent mainly on base enjoyments, nay, on the enjoyments of any kind. His household was of the frugalist. His common diet, barley bread and water. Sometimes for months there was not a fire lighted in his hearth. A poor, hard-working, ill-provided man, careless of what vulgar men toiled for. They called him a prophet, you say. Why, he stood there face to face with them, there not enshrined in any mystery, visibly clouting his own cloak, cobbing his own shoes, fighting, counseling, ordering in the midst of them. They must have seen what kind of man he was. Let him be called what you like. No emperor with his tiaras was obeyed as this man in a cloak of his own clouting. SubhanAllah. Confused by the apparently hopeless task of reconciling the life of the Prophet with the absurd statements long accepted as authentic, Washington Irving weighs him on the scales of fairness. His military triumphs awakened no pride nor vainglory, as they would have done had they been effected for selfish purposes. In the time of his greatest power, he maintained the same simplicity of manners and appearances in the days of his adversity. It is this perfect abnegation of self, connected with this apparent heartfelt piety running throughout the various phases of his fortune, which perplex one in forming a just estimate of Muhammad's character. Wa alaikum assalam. How are you? When he hung over the deathbed of his infant son Ibrahim, resignation to the will of God was exhibited in his conduct under the keenest of afflictions, and the hope of soon rejoining his child in paradise was his consolation. See Muhammad and his successors. Aisha, questioned after the death of the Prophet concerning his habits, replied that he mended his own clothes, cobbled his own shoes, and helped her in the household duties. How far removed from Western concepts of Muhammad's sanguinary character is Aisha's simple admission that he loved most of all to sew. He also accepted the invitations of slaves and sat at meals with servants, declaring himself to be a servant. Of all vices, he hated lying the most. Before his death, he freed all his slaves. He never permitted his family to use for personal ends any of the alms or tithe money given by his people. He was fond of sweetmeats and used rainwater for drinking purposes. His time he divided into three parts, namely, the first he gave to God, the second to his family, and the third to himself. The latter portion, however, he later sacrificed to the service of his people. He dressed chiefly in white, but also wore red, yellow, and green. Muhammad entered Mecca wearing a black turban and bearing a black standard. He wore only the plainest of garments, declaring that rich and conspicuous raiments did not become the pious and did not remove his shoes at prayer. He was particularly concerned with the cleanliness of his teeth, and at the time of his death, when too weak to speak, indicated his desire for a toothpick. When fearful of forgetting something, the Prophet tied a thread to his ring. He once had a very fine gold ring, but noted that his followers had taken to wearing similar rings in emulation of him. He removed his own and threw it away, lest his followers form an evil habit. The most frequent and apparently the most damaging accusation brought against Muhammad is that of polygamy. Those who sincerely believe the harem to be irreconcilable with spirituality should, with consistency, move for expurgation of the Psalms of David and the Proverbs of Solomon from the list of inspired writings. For the harem of Islam's prophet was insignificant compared with that maintained by Israel's wisest king and the reputed favorite of the Most High. The popular conception that Muhammad taught that women had no soul and could attain heaven only through marriage is not substantiated by the words and attitude of the prophets during his lifetime. In a paper entitled The Influence of Islam on Social Conditions, read at the World's Parliament of Religions, held in Chicago in 1893, Mohammed Webb states the charge and answers it thus. It has been said that Muhammad in the Quran denied a soul to women and ranked her with the animals. The Quran places her on a perfect and complete equality with man, and the Prophet's teachings often place her in a position superior to the male in some respects. Mr. Webb justifies his stand by quoting from the 35th verse of the 33rd surah of the Quran. Verily, the Muslims of either sex, and the true believers of either sex, and the devout men and the devout women, and the men of veracity, and the women of veracity, and the patient men, and the patient women, and the humble men, and the humble women, and the almsgivers of either sex, and the men who fast, and the women who fast, and the chaste men, and the chaste women, and those of either sex who remember Allah frequently, for them hath Allah prepared forgiveness and a great reward. Here, the attainment of heaven is clearly set forth as a problem whose only solution is that of individual merit. On the day of his death, Muhammad told Fatima, his beloved daughter, and Safiya, his aunt, work ye out that which shall gain acceptance for you with the Lord. For I verily have no power with him to save you in any wise. The Prophet did not advise either woman to rely upon the virtues of her husband, nor in any manner did he indicate the woman's salvation to be dependent upon the human frailty of her spouse. Everything to the contrary notwithstanding, Muhammad is not responsible for the contradictions and inconsistencies in the Quran, for the volume was not compiled and did not assume its present form until over 20 years after his death. Bear in mind, I am reading the words of a Freemason here, but I don't believe there's any contradictions and inconsistencies in the Quran, to be honest, but he is commenting upon what were popular ideas within his time, and he's trying to put the record straight. So he's saying even if there were, then Muhammad wouldn't be responsible because it was compiled after his passing away. In its present state, the Quran is for the major part a jumble of, it's not a jumble of hearsay, through which occasional shines forth an example of true inspiration. From what, that's probably because of bad translations that he read. What is known of the man Muhammad, it is reasonable to suppose that these nobler and finer portions represent the actual doctrines of the Prophet. The remainder are obvious interpolations, some arising from misunderstanding and others direct forgeries, calculated to satisfy the temporal ambitions of conquering Islam. On this subject, Godfrey Higgins speaks with his usual perspicacity. Okay. Here we have the Quran of Muhammad and the first four sincere and zealous patriarchs, and the Quran of the conquering and magnificent Saracens, puffed up with pride and vanity. The Quran of the eclectic philosopher was not likely to suit the conquerors of Asia. A new one must be grafted on the old, so to find a justification for the enormities. So I think here they're probably not really talking about the Quran, but they're not. These people are not scholars of Islam, bear in mind. He's a 33rd degree Mason, but he seems to be writing from the perspective of in defense of Muhammad and seeing Muhammad as someone who was a good person and a prophet and inspiration. Which, when you consider that he was an American Freemason living in the last century, from 1919 onwards, when there wasn't much available on Islam, it's interesting. To the discerning few, it is evident that Muhammad had a knowledge of that secret doctrine, which must needs constitute the core of every great philosophical, religious, or ethical institution. Through one of four possible avenues, Muhammad may have contacted the ancient mystery teachings: through direct contact with the Grey School in the invisible world, through the Nestorian Christian monks, through the mysterious holy men who appeared and disappeared at various intervals during the period in which the surahs of the Quran were revealed, through a decadent school already existing in Arabia, which school, in spite of its lapse into idolatry, still retained the secrets of the ancient wisdom cult. The arcana of Islam may yet be demonstrated to have been directly founded upon the ancient pagan mysteries performed at the Kaaba centuries before the birth of Muhammad. In fact, it is generally admitted that many of the ceremonies now embodied into Islamic mysteries are survivals of pagan Arabia. The feminine principle is repeatedly emphasized in Islamic symbolism. For example, Friday, which is sacred to the planet Venus, is the Muslims' holy day. Green is the color of the Prophet, and being symbolic of verdure, is evidently associated with the world mother. And both the Islamic crescent and the scimitar may be interpreted to signify the crescent shape of either the moon or Venus. The famous stone of the Kaaba, says Jennings, which is so devoutly kissed by the faithful, is a talisman. It is said that the figure of Venus is seen to this day engraved upon it with a crescent. Well, obviously it's not, but you know, he's done well what he's written. This very Kaaba itself was at first an idolatrous temple where the Arabians worshipped Al-Uzza, God, and Isa, that is Venus. See Kilis Enoch, the second messenger of God. The Mussulmans, writes Sir William Jones, are already a sort of heterodox Christians. They are Christians, if Locke reasons justly, because they firmly believe in the Immaculate Conception, divine character, and miracles of the Messiah. But they are heterodox in denying vehemently his character of Son and his equality as God with the Father, of whose unity in attributes they entertain and express the most awful ideas, while they consider our doctrine as perfect blasphemy and insist that our copies of the scriptures have been corrupted both by Jews and Christians. The following lines are declared by the followers of the Prophet to have been deleted from the Christian Gospels. And when Jesus, the son of Mary, said, O children of Israel, verily I am the apostle of God sent unto you, confirming the law which was delivered before me, and bringing good tidings of an apostle who shall come after me, and whose name shall be Ahmed. In the present text, containing the prophecy of Jesus concerning a comforter to come after him, it is further claimed that the word comforter should be translated illustrious, and that it had a direct reference to Muhammad. Also, that the tongues of flame that descended upon the apostles on the day of Pentecost in no way could be interpreted as signifying the promised comforter. When asked, however, for definite proof that the original Gospels containing the so-called expurgated references to Muhammad, the Muslims make a counter-demand for the production of the original documents upon which Christianity is founded. Until such writings are discovered, the point under dispute must remain a source of controversy. Wa alaikum salam from the UK. It's good of you to join us. I hope you're well. If you're wondering, I'm reading from this book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall, who was a scholar of different philosophies and religions. He was a Christian pastor and a 33rd degree Freemason. And I'm reading it because it may be of interest to the people who watch my videos to see what he said about Islam. To ignore the heritage of culture received from Islam would be an undeniable oversight. Sorry, it splits from one line to the other. An unpardonable oversight. Yeah, unforgivable. Yeah, it would be. For when the crescent triumphed over the cross in southern Europe, it was the harbinger of a civilization which had no equal in its day. In Studies in a Mosque, Stanley Lane Poole writes, for nearly 8 centuries, under her Mohammedan rulers, Spain set to all Europe a shining example of a civilized and enlightened state. Art, literature, and science prospered as they then prospered nowhere else in Europe. Students flocked from France and Germany and England to drink from the fountains of learning which flowed only in the cities of the Moors, in the cities of the Muslims in Spain. The surgeons and doctors of Andalusia were in the van of science. Women were encouraged to devote themselves to serious study, and a lady doctor was not unknown among the people of Cordoba. Mathematics, astronomy, and botany, history, philosophy, and jurisprudence were to be mastered in Spain, and in Spain alone. The library of original sources thus sums up the effects of Islam. The results of Mohammedanism have been greatly underestimated. In the century after Muhammad's death, it wrestled Asia Minor, Africa, and Spain from Christianity, more than half of the civilized world, and established a civilization, the highest in the world during the Dark Ages. It brought the Arabian race to their highest development, raised the position of women in the East, though it retained polygamy, was intensively monotheistic, and until the Turks gained control, for the most part encouraged progress. In the same work, among the great Islamic scientists and philosophers who have made substantial contributions to human knowledge are listed Gerber or Jafar, who in the 9th century laid the foundations for modern chemistry, Ben Musa, who in the 10th century introduced the theory of algebra, Al-Khaz, who in the 11th century made a profound study of optics and discovered the magnifying power of convex lenses. And in the 11th century also, both Avicenna or Ibn Sina, whose medical encyclopedia was the standard of his age, and the great Kabbalist Avi Kebron or Ibn Gibril. Looking back upon the science of all the Mohammedans, resumes the authority just quoted, it will be seen they laid Looking back upon the science of the Mohammedans, resumes the authority just quoted, it will be seen that they laid the first foundations of chemistry and made the important advances in mathematics and optics. Their discoveries never had the influence they should have had upon the course of European civilization, but this was because Europe itself was not enlightened enough to grasp and make use of them. Gerber's observation that oxidized iron weighs heavier than before oxidation had to be made over again. So some of their work in optics and many of their geographical discoveries, they had rounded Africa long before Vasco da Gama. The composition of gunpowder came into Northern Europe from them. We must never forget that the Dark Ages in Christian Europe were the bright ones of Mohammedan world. In the field of philosophy, the Arabs started by adopting the Neoplatonism they found in Europe and gradually working back to Aristotle. What means the subtle mystery of the phoenix reborn every 600 years? Faintly within the sanctuary of the world mysteries is whispered the answer. 600 years before Christ, the phoenix of wisdom, Pythagoras, spread its wings and died upon the altar of humanity, consumed by the sacrificial fire. In Nazareth, the bird was again reborn from its own ashes, only to die upon the tree which had its roots in Adam's skull. In AD 600 appeared Ahmed Muhammad. Again the phoenix suffered, this time from the poison of Khyber, and from its charred ashes rose to spread its rings across the face of Mongolia, where in the 12th century Genghis Khan established the rule of wisdom. Encircling the mighty Desi of the Gobi, the phoenix again gave up its form, which now lies buried in a glass sarcophagus under a pyramid bearing upon it the ineffable figures of the mysteries. After the lapse of 600 years from the death of Genghis Khan, did Napoleon Bonaparte, who believed himself to be a man of destiny, contact in his wanderings the strange legend of the continual periodic rebirth of wisdom? Did he feel the spreading wings of the phoenix within himself, and did he believe the hope of the world had taken flesh upon in him? The eagle on his standard may well have been the phoenix. This would explain why he was moved to believe himself predestined to establish the kingdom of Christ on earth, and is perhaps the clue to his little understood friendliness towards the Muslims. In addition to what I've just read, there are a few plates which have descriptions with them. Muhammad's night journey to heaven, the Kaaba, the holy place within Islam, and it's got a little description underneath. So, I mean, this is what Manly P. Hall wrote about Islam. And it's quite interesting because there are an awful lot of misconceptions about Islam, and there are also a lot of misconceptions about Freemasonry. And the fact that this 33rd degree Mason wrote from what seems to be a sincere perspective to try to undo some of the propaganda and nonsense that was doing the rounds in his time. And yeah, he got a few details wrong, there's no doubt about that. But he did remarkably well, considering that there wasn't a huge amount of information about Islam around when he first started writing this. And certainly it wasn't as widely distributed as it is today. So, I mean, this is, it's very interesting. I mean, he was not focused on Islam. He was researching all manner of different religious and spiritual teachings around the world. So it wasn't like he was focused on Islam, but the fact that he wrote this and included Islam in his book, and yeah, from what he wrote, it seems that he wrote it from sincerity. I mean, this book was published in 1928, so he was writing this book in the 1920s. And now, back in the 1920s, I mean, how much good quality material on Islam was available in the United States of America or in English anywhere around the world. It was very limited. But from what he read, he realized that Muhammad Sallallahu was a good person and that he had some extraordinary qualities. And he wrote that. And, you know, this is someone who, I mean, you know, he was regarded as a 33rd degree Mason within the Scottish Rite. In 1973, 47 years after writing this book, he was awarded recognized as a 33rd degree Mason within the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite. So, I mean, if we're to believe that, you know, all Freemasons are our enemy, this doesn't make sense. And likewise, you know, there are people in the West who believe all Muslims are their enemies. And they hate people like me more than anybody else because I'm someone who is talking about Islam and preaching. Well, I don't really preach, but I talk about Islam and disseminate the teachings of Islam. And there are people in the West who would regard me as the biggest traitor to my civilization. And of course, I do not see things that way. I'm very British, very much a part of my culture and society. But at the same time, my faith is Islam. Manly P. Hall was a Christian who was very open-minded and obviously into Masonry. But he wrote this about Islam and he defended the Prophet Muhammad in this book. May Allah forgive and reward him for that. So I don't know if there's any questions today. I mean, if there's any questions, then happy to take them. Otherwise, I will sign off in a minute. It's good to see some people joining me today to say salams. It's always appreciated. It's nice to hear from people around the world. I am happy to have more of a discussion on Friday Reflections when I have the time. Or even after the zikr on the Thursdays. I'm quite happy to do that. But it depends who's around at the time. And it also depends on what time I've got available. Freemasonry is a fraternity that was developed in the West. It has its origins in Europe, possibly from the Knights Templars. But there's different theories on how Freemasonry started. But it is a fraternity, a brotherhood between people who have a vision for society that should be civilized and should be promoting knowledge and the liberal arts and good neighborliness with everybody, regardless of religious beliefs, that we should build a society based on good principles. A lot of the good things which you see in the West, like the way things are organized and when things are done properly, that they are done properly, that there is a system of law, there is when you have meetings that you take minutes and you write things down, you keep proper records, that you treat people fairly. A lot of this actually comes from Freemasonry. People don't realize it because they only hear what they watch on YouTube or Instagram about Freemasonry. I'm not a Freemason myself. I've never signed up to Freemasonry. But I do like to give a fair presentation of things. And I do like to know what the facts are. And it's important as Muslims that we should do that because we are told by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran that if we ever hear a record or something has come to us, some account comes to us, before we act on it, we should check it. We should check if that is accurate information or not. Yes, there are Muslims that have joined Freemasonry. Even when I visited Washington, D.C., there's a friend of mine who isn't Muslim. His name's Fred, but he took me to his lodge. And when I was in his lodge, I saw on their table in the middle of the lodge, they had a Bible, a Quran, and I think it was a Bhagavad Gita or something next to it. And I do believe there were a few Muslims in that lodge that were Freemasons. There is also some suggestion that Freemasonry may have come out of Sufism. Idris Shah wrote something about this some years ago, among others. And there are certain things within Freemasonry which do seem to come out of certain types of Sufism, which we see within the Muslim world, that encourage people to work together and be civilized, that prioritize values and principles of how we live, to have good adab and good akhlaq, good manners and respect towards other people, and to establish justice. And, you know, also not just with Muslims, but also if we have Christians that we're living as neighbors with, that we treat them fairly and treat them properly. Same with Jews, same with Buddhists, same with whoever we are living with, that we have to ensure that they are given their rights, just as we expect our rights. There were Sufis that were doing this within the Muslim world. And Freemasons, still to this day, there are people, and sometimes they get into trouble with it by other kinds of Muslims who don't like fairness and just want to dominate. But we see that in Freemasonry too, that they have that idea. You know, anybody, there were two types of Freemasonry that I know about. One, the original type, is that you have to actually believe in God to join the Masons. You have to have a belief in the Supreme Being, whether you call it God or you call it the Creator or whatever, but you have to have a belief in the Supreme Being. You can be any religion, but you have to have a belief in the Supreme Being. And that's the traditional kind of Freemasonry that you can join up, but you have to have a belief in God. Then there's another kind of Freemasonry that's spun off from that, probably because of an increase in atheism. And they don't demand that you have to believe in God, but you must believe in like right conduct and certain high principles in order to join. So it is interesting, and there is a lot of good within it. You know, it's quite shocking when I see some of these conspiracy videos on YouTube, because it doesn't bear any resemblance to what I know from the Freemasons that I know. They're not like that. I'm not saying there aren't some Freemasons out there that aren't corrupt or badly behaved, or probably there are. But so there are corrupt and badly behaved Muslims. There are corrupt and badly behaved Christians. There are corrupt and badly believed Star Trek fans. You know, you get that with any group of people. But it doesn't mean that everybody within Freemasonry is like that. And certainly, I mean, this book by Manly P. Hall is a very interesting book. I mean, it is altogether, it's nearly 800 pages long, and it contains knowledge and wisdom from all manner of different traditions around the world. And he clearly had respect for all of them, including Islam. Is there any other questions? I think I'll probably sign off because it's getting a bit late here, and I need to read Asa and then get something to eat, I think. But if you find these videos useful, please don't forget to subscribe to my Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube channels. Yeah, it's look forward to seeing you all next time. My next broadcast should be my weekly Sohbet and Zikr next Thursday, and should be around about 7 o'clock or 7:30 in the evening. And then I do my Friday reflections, which usually are sometime around 6 or 7-ish in the evening. Sometimes I do it a bit earlier, it depends what I'm doing. Well, you know, as Muslims, we should also have respect for anyone that is, you know, well, firstly, we should respect people as human beings. I mean, this is actually a teaching from the Quran and from Prophet Muhammad and Imam Ali, may Allah bless them. But we should, first of all, respect everybody as a human being. But anyone who is following a high philosophical or religious tradition, and they are of good conduct and well behaved, we should respect even more, because that means a lot of what they are about as a human being is similar to what a Muslim should be about as a human being. We have something in common with them. And I'm sure if the Prophet Muhammad was walking amongst us today, he would respect such people. It is sad that we do see some Muslims not like that. But yes, there are people from all different traditions around the world who they will have that respect. And we should as Muslims, because it's actually part of our religion to be like that. Anyway, I will sign off now. I wish you all the best. Whoever's joined me from the UK, have a wonderful evening. And to everybody around the world, I wish you all the very best and look forward to you joining me next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.